Sabia que você inspira outras pessoas? Às vezes é difícil reconhecer o seu valor, mas eu tô aqui para dizer, você vale muito. L'Oréal Paris quer lembrar todas as mulheres disso, inclusive no cinema. Por isso, criou o Lights on Women's Worth Awards no Festival de Cannes, um prêmio que celebra as diferentes narrativas das mulheres no cinema e inspira outras, porque representatividade e reconhecimento são importantes. L'Oréal Paris, porque você vale muito.
You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything. God, it knows I'm here.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
Now look, Doc, we're buddies, okay? But don't try to convert me.
I'm trying to prepare you. My name's Marquay, Dr. Marquay, a scientist interested in the supernatural. The unnatural, if you like. I came to Hill House to find the key to another world. Assisting me in this exploration of the unknown was Eleanor, Nell, who could look back into the past, and Theo, something of a witch who could see into the future. This is Luke, who didn't believe in anything, until evil, patient and waiting, made him change his mind.
Stop it! God. God. Whose hand was I holding?
How many of us take seriously the things we cannot or do not want to understand, simply because we are afraid?
Eleanor, you're Paul! Did you hear me calling?
Oh, this house. You have to watch it every minute.
The Haunting was produced and directed by Robert Wise, brilliant producer of West Side Story. The stars consist of a cross-section of top talent in the world of entertainment. Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, Russ Tamblyn.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace? That some houses, like Hill House, are born bad?
Hello again, you're listening to Girls, Guts, and Giallo, and I'm here today with Dani Janae. Hi, Dani.
Hi.
And we're talking about the 1963 film The Haunting, or sometimes known as The Haunting of Hill House. So, Dani, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, what you're about?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Dani Janae. I am a poet and writer, in general, all-around horror fan of things that are creepy or grotesque in some way. I am a writer for Autostraddle, but also just a freelance writer. So I do a lot of publication work. Yeah, that's who I am.
Cool. And you're also a tarantula owner.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. My tarantula's name is Delphine Sade. And she is an Arizona blonde tarantula, and she's very beautiful.
I'm obsessed with your tarantula posts. You inspired me once before we were following each other on Twitter to tweet lesbians who own arachnids or insects are the most powerful.
That's true.
It's true. It's just true. So we're talking about The Haunting. Why did you choose this film, and when did you first see it?
I chose this film because I am just so intrigued by either film or like TV show adaptations of that book, The Haunting of Hill House, and just seeing what people do differently with them. I first saw it a couple years ago. I do a thing every Halloween time where I watch a different horror movie every day.
Same.
So I watched that one. And there's a particular scene that I'm sure we're going to talk about that like really scared me, and I think about it a lot. So I like became sort of obsessed with it because of that, and because of Claire Bloom and her portrayal as Theo, which I really liked and love to talk about.
Yes, love her.
Yeah.
And I think I saw this I saw it a long time ago, but I hadn't rewatched it in a while until we decided to do it for this episode. And it was a lot gayer than I remembered.
Yeah.
So, 1963 British film directed by Robert Wise, and it's based on the 1959 novel The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I haven't read. Have you read it?
I've read it in parts.
Okay. Yeah. Like I've read excerpts. Yeah. And I know that there's a lot of things that they changed. I know that I think what I read in the film comment article that I sent you was that Shirley Jackson wasn't necessarily happy with how much they amped up the lesbian subtext. Like I think she wanted it to be more subtle, but I mean to us it's so subtle, but I guess in 1963 like it was a big deal. So it stars Julie Harris as Eleanor, Claire Bloom as Theo, and then some men. Richard Johnson, Russ Tamlin, they're there. I'm kidding. They're really great in the movie. And the screenplay is by Nelson Gidding. So how much did you read about how they actually made the film? Like with the camera work? Okay.
Yeah, I just did some brief little research on it.
Yeah.
Just acquainted with it.
So they Robert Wise approached Panavision to make a special camera for the film.
Oh.
So he used this 30 millimeter anamorphic wide lens, but Panavision didn't finish it in time. Like it hadn't been tested, so it was not technically ready to be used. So it caused some distortions. And it was only given to him, Robert Wise, on the condition that he sign a memorandum where he acknowledged that the lens was imperfect.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but they utilized that aspect of it. So the cinematographer, David Bolton, planned sequences that kept the camera moving, utilizing these low-angle takes and incorporating unusual pans and tracking shots.
Yeah. I noticed there are a lot of those like from below angle shots, especially during the high tension moments.
Yes. Yeah. This film, for 1963 has a lot of really experimental camera work.
Yeah.
And a lot of really strange edits. Like the edits it's called a match on action cut. Mm-hmm. So like somebody will be walking into a room and then it'll cut and they'll be in the room, but it disrupts the 180-degree rule, because what the 180-degree rule is, I'm getting into my editing teacher mode here. The 180-degree rule is like you're always keeping people in the same line of sight. So if you have an establishing shot where person A is on the right and person B is on the left, when you cut to them in the conversation, person A always stays on the left, person A always stays on the right, person B always stays on the left. But if you disrupt the 180-degree rule, now they've switched sides.
Okay.
So they do, and you're supposed to follow the 180-degree rule to keep continuity.
Okay.
So that you always know where people are in space. Mm-hmm. But in this, they disrupt the 180-degree rule a lot because you're supposed to feel very uncomfortable in the house, just like the people do. Yeah. Fun facts. So as Gidding crafted the screenplay, he came to believe that the novel was not a ghost story, but a compilation of insane thoughts from the lead character, Eleanor Vance. So they really amped that up.
They definitely did.
Right. He theorized that she was having a nervous breakdown. And originally, they were going to write the script so that you find out that Hill House is actually the hospital where she's being held, and which I would have hated. Right. And Dr. Markway is the psychiatrist, and the colds and the banging sounds are all like the results of shock treatment.
Wow.
Yeah, but Shirley Jackson was like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, because that would have sucked. I like it this way a lot better, obviously. Julie Harris, who plays Eleanor, actually wanted the role because the role was interesting, but also because she had an interest in parapsychology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That is cool. And Bloom's character, they hired the costume designer Mary Quant to design mod clothing specifically for her, so she had like a more beatnik look.
Yeah.
Right? I love her clothes.
More fashionable.
Yeah, I love her clothing in this movie.
Yeah, me too.
And Robert Wise called The Haunting one of his top 10 or 12 favorites among the films he made, and that it was his favorite filmmaking experience.
Yeah.
Just like a few more facts. For Hill House, they shot at Eddington Park, which is a 19th century country house in England.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was very spooked by it and didn't want to stay there.
Yeah.
So they actually shot the interiors on a soundstage at the British MGM studios, which I, ignorantly enough, did not even know that MGM had overseas studios.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating. And Wise said that his contract with MGM specified that the picture could only be shot in black and white.
Okay.
Which he preferred for it anyway. Harris suffered from depression during the shoot and felt alienated from her fellow castmates, but she says this actually helped her develop Eleanor's character, because that's her entire character in the film.
Yeah, definitely.
I wonder if she just like really got deep into the method acting of it.
I think about that too, now that you say that.
Yeah. The reception of the film was mixed. Audiences found it scary, but critics found it boring and lacking in action. But in retrospect, it's remembered as a landmark, particularly for its special effects, which are so cool. And Robert Wise would use the staircases as makeshift dollies. So, right. So like those scenes where it looks like a spiritual entity is entering someone, like the camera was placed on this makeshift dolly on the staircase, and they would move it really fast, so it would look like somebody was like
That's really
ghost
awesome.
was going inside someone. Yeah, it's really cool. So that is the making of Haunting of Hill House. And now we can talk about this plot.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So we open with this voiceover about Hill House, and we get this great creepy music, beautiful high contrast black and white cinematography, and we get the narration of Hill House. So do you remember what is the lore about Hill House?
Wait, do you think that the voiceover is Dr. Markaway?
That's what I thought, because he's telling Mrs. Sanderson about the house, or he's talking about the background of the house.
Yeah, he's talking about the Crane family, Hugh and Abigail Crane, and then I guess this is the house that Hugh built himself for his wife and his daughter. And I guess immediately upon arrival, his wife dies in like this tragic accident.
Right. In her carriage, which crashes against a tree.
Yeah.
And as she approached the house for the first time, so she never actually stepped foot inside the house. And then Crane remarried. But his second wife also died. in the
Yeah.
house from a
She
fall
grew up
down
on
the
the stairs.
stairs. Yeah. And then Crane's daughter, Abigail, lived in the house for the rest of her life. And there's this kind of cool cross dissolve thing they do where they show her getting older in the same bed. She never moved out of the nursery. And she died calling for her nurse companion.
Yeah.
Right?
Banging on the wall.
Yeah, banging on the wall. And her companion, her paid companion, inherited the house, but later hanged herself from the spiral staircase in the library. And then, so it's got this sordid history. Hill House was eventually inherited by Mrs. Sanderson, and although it stood empty for some time, so she owns it, but nobody lives in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was immediately struck by, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, that women die at the house, but Hugh Crane died away from the house in London.
Yeah.
So, like, men don't die in this house.
Yeah.
Only women.
It's also like, it seems like whatever entity is in the house only wants to interact with the women.
Right.
Like the men can have like experiences with whatever's there, but it's the women that are mostly targeted, and who see and feel things and are more receptive to things.
Right. And it kind of reminds me of, there is this book, I don't know if you've read it, it's called The Monstrous Feminine by Barbara Creed. You would probably really like it. And she talks about the haunted house imagery in horror films as like a monstrous womb.
Oh.
And how it acts as a womb, but it's also like, to me, the women in this, it's kind of saying that they're more in touch with the monstrous nature of the house and like more in touch with nature also. Like more intuitive. A lot of horror movies do this where women are more tuned into the paranormal. I can't think of a lot of examples of movies where men are the ones tuned into the paranormal. They exist, obviously, but yeah, this is very common imagery. So we meet Mrs. Sanderson and Dr. Markway, and he is insisting to her that he wants to study Hill House, and she says no one has ever been able to stay there for more than a few days because it's so haunted. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Markway tells her that he intends to occupy the house with these carefully selected assistants to document the supernatural, and they all have experiences with the supernatural. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Sanderson brings up that the assistants that he's chosen are women. So
yeah, she does.
Right. So there's definitely this fear of women and sexuality, and women just being around women. Like she's afraid that it'll be indecent, but it's also kind of implying that they're like these conduits for the house, like you were saying. Like the spirits only kind of interact with women. Mm-hmm. So Dr. Markway says his wife will not be joining because she disapproves, but she'll be there later. Yeah. Mrs. Sanderson's like, who is this guy? Her servant? He's
I have no idea who that guy is.
Right? Like, okay. Suggests that her nephew Luke, who is to inherit the house, who wants to live off of it, joins them. So mm-hmm. Luke is like, he'll come in later, and he's kind of like the skeptic of the group. Yeah. We meet Eleanor Lance. Incredible performance.
Yeah.
Like,
she's incredible.
She's really like the glue of this film.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she experienced poltergeist activity as a child, and spent her adult life caring for her invalid mother, whose recent death has left her with severe guilt. And she seems to be mentally ill and is treated like a child by her sister and her sister's husband.
Yeah, her family is very belittling to her, especially around like the death of her mother. And, just being very condescending to her when they speak to her about the car and how it's half her car, but it's not really hers. And they don't really think she owns it or that she's capable of driving because of some like perceived mental illness. They're just like very cruel to her. And
Yeah,
that's
they're
true.
abusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, like really, she really wants to get away from them.
Yeah,
For good reason.
definitely.
Yeah. And Eleanor, she's obviously like she has like an untreated mental illness. She's very nervous. She's kind of emotionally stunted because she spent all of her adult life taking care of an old woman. And what's also interesting about this film is this is common in films now, but I feel like it was less common at the time, is her inner monologue.
Yeah.
That we get throughout the whole film. Like, we're really in her head. And her inner monologue starts to be a huge part of the movie at this point. She hopes that this is like her big chance to leave and never return to her family. And I also noticed that there's themes here about women's independence in regards to mental illness. Like, you know, we're kind of moving into a women's lib moment in history, and I feel like a lot of the conversation is about how, and has been historically, about how women are, how am I trying to word this? Like, I'm thinking of the yellow wallpaper, and right, how women like go insane when they're confined, or like women are pathologized or made to be seen as hysterical for wanting independence. And that is how I sort of read what was happening here.
Yeah, I got that too, for sure.
Yeah. So Eleanor, who also goes by Nell, runs into, she's going to Hill House, and she runs into this ominous caretaker, Dudley. Dudley and his wife, they're kind of like classic horror movie harbingers of doom.
Yeah. The wife is hilarious.
She's so funny.
Yeah.
How she just like laughs when she leaves the room.
Like, no one can hear your screams in the night, and then laughs and leaves.
I know. Yeah, respect her. Yeah, she's Dudley has a contempt of city people also, which was interesting to me. Like, the horror movie uses like, I don't know if you have thought about this or can speak to this, but the way that horror movies that are set in cities have a different kind of dread than horror movies that are set in rural country areas. Like, in this movie, it's very much emphasized, like, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah.
And in horror movies that are set in cities, the horror is more like anybody could be lurking.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And in this one, it's like you're alone with this ghost. So Eleanor finally sees Hill House, and she says, this is when she starts to say the house is staring at her. Like it's a person.
Yeah. I noticed with the shots of the house, there are a lot of like, there's a lot of shadow play that makes it look sort of like something ominous is in it, or like the house itself is sort of like a living thing.
Right.
That I thought was really interesting, which I wonder if was a part of the camera that you were talking about, the camera that wasn't like made correctly or like finished.
Right. That's, yeah, I think so. And I think, you know, specifically the cinematographer, like, I think they wanted the house to look like it had eyes, like those two windows. Because she's, you know, she starts to anthropomorphize the house.
Yeah, definitely. Very early she does that.
Yeah, like like almost immediately. Like, she sees it. She's got this nervous tick, right, where she blinks really rapidly.
Yeah.
Her inner monologue becomes really frantic. She's scared of the house, but she's also drawn to it.
Yeah.
Eleanor meets the silent and creepy Mrs. Dudley.
Yeah.
And she's disturbed by these various statues in the house. And her own reflection even scares her. Mrs. Dudley emphasizes that her and her husband do not stay on the grounds past dark. And like we were saying, like, help is far away. And then she laughs. Yeah. Eleanor takes in the vast gothic splendor of her creepy room. And her inner monologue says, I'm like a small creature swallowed whole by a monster.
Yeah.
Which I also found very sexual. I mean, that could just be me. But
definitely.
Yeah, like it, and that also makes me think of the house's womb. Like, she's this little thing, just like in this vast, monstrous womb. Nell meets Theodora.
Yes.
The other subject who is in the room next door. And she's very glamorous and beautiful.
Yeah.
And she's got this leather hat on.
Yeah. There's like this immediate contrast between Nell, who's like so nervous and is already like scared and contemplating like leaving, but still pulled into the house and wants to stay. And then there's Theodora, who's like this self-assured, confident woman who's here to like, she knows things about Nell that like Nell hasn't said yet. Things like that. Just like, she's automatically like a very powerful person as opposed to Nell, who like wants independence but hasn't found her way to it yet.
Yes. Yeah. And their appearance is really contrasted, like you were saying. Like Theo is very, and she's got that cute tomboyish name too. Like she goes by Theo, and she's very modern. And Eleanor seems like she's almost of a different time.
Yeah, definitely.
Like of the past, and that also because she's been stunted because she's been caring for an old woman, and Theo has been living in the modern world. And they're kind of flirty. Like immediately, it's really gay. And Theo says, put on some of your new clothes. And my note here is, Mommy!
Yeah.
So Theo is mommy in this, very much.
Major mommy vibes from Theo.
Major. And I was reading, but I don't really agree with this, but I was reading that the representation of Theo is different than other representations of lesbians at this time because she's not like a predatory villain and because she's feminine. And I was like, a lot of predatory lesbians in film are feminine.
Yeah, definitely.
And also she is predatory. Like, she's a gaslighter.
Yeah.
Like, so I definitely don't agree with that.
Yeah, me either.
So the reason Theo is there is because she's a psychic.
Yes.
And Theo and Nell explore the house. They're kind of immediately, like, close. And they get lost. They feel this chilly presence. Eleanor says the house is alive. And Theo says, it wants you, Nell. The house is calling you.
Yeah.
So there's this, like, really shaky camera work whenever Nell is frantic. The women meet Dr. Marquay. Nell is relieved. I find that Nell is always more comforted when there's a man around.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Theo is like, take it or leave it.
Yeah. Theo sometimes has this, like, contempt for the men when they arrive, especially Dr. Marquay.
Yes.
He seems like a nuisance to her when he arrives, especially when Nell is there as well.
Right. And Dr. Marquay explains that the large maze-like mansion's walls were constructed with angles slightly askew, resulting in off-center perspectives and doors that open and close by themselves. We meet Luke Sanderson, who is making martinis and immediately flirting with the women, and Theo is like, ew.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we learned that there was originally 6 people in this experiment, but they all dropped out because they were afraid of Hill House.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And I wonder if they were also women.
Yeah.
They don't say.
There was that shot of the board where Dr. Marquay is like writing down the names of people he wants to come. And then he like checks off Eleanor and Nance at one point. And I'm trying to remember if there were, I know there was a couple more male names on there, but I'm trying to remember.
Okay.
how many people were on there.
Right. That would be interesting to look at to see
Yeah.
what the gender makeup of that is. Dr. Markway explains why he's interested in the house and in them in particular, and it's because they have experiences with the supernatural. And he says Nell has experience with a poltergeist, but she denies it.
Yeah, she denies it like vehemently.
Yeah, and so with the experience she had with the poltergeist is that rocks were falling on her house for days.
Yeah, for 3 days.
Right. And she denies it, interestingly enough, because this is why she's chosen for the experiment. So it's interesting that she now chooses to deny it.
Yeah.
I feel like she's trying to look like she's not as crazy as she is.
Yeah.
But it just makes her look crazier. Dr. Markway rejects the word haunted, which I found interesting. He calls the house deranged.
Oh, yeah.
And that the house was born bad. Even making this more like the house is a living entity.
Yeah.
Luke is the skeptic. Eleanor interrupts in like this crazy fashion because they've moved on from her talking about the poltergeist. And she is, she says, the poltergeist was just neighbors throwing rocks at the house. Mother says they hated us because we wouldn't mix with them. Mm-hmm. And my note here is major mommy issues.
Very much. I admit.
This movie is so mommy issues. Like,
yeah.
Eleanor has such mommy issues, and Theo becomes like a toxic mommy.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's very much about the fraught relationship between mother and daughter.
And Abigail has, 2 moms die very suddenly within her, like, moving into this house.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So very much about the deranged relationships that mothers and daughters can have. Mm-hmm. All 4 people hang out in the main room, which is like the room of operations. And Eleanor feels like she belongs. Her inner monologue is very unhinged. Like but she also feels like she's part of something, which she hasn't felt like ever. Mm-hmm. Eleanor has this feeling that she's being watched by something. And Theo says to her, if you're feeling the least bit nervous, you can come into my room. I'm like, yeah, I bet. And she also says, you've been thinking of changing your hair. I know the style just for you.
Yeah.
Like
again, with the mommy vibes.
Again, yeah, but overbearing, overbearing like Nell's real mother, probably.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Eleanor wakes in the night thinking her mother is calling her.
Yeah.
Because that's what her mother used to do. Her mother would like never let her sleep. She would bang on the wall all night. And then she remembers where she is. Eleanor and Theo are terrified by supernatural occurrences outside Theo's bedroom window. There's this deafening banging against the door, and the room is deathly cold. So this was another thing I found interesting. There's a lot of parts in the movie where that the supernatural entity is there because it gets really cold. Oh. And Robert Wise wanted a way to show that on camera, which obviously, how can you show a temperature change? So what they did is they had them put this like ghostly pale makeup on them whenever it would be cold, which I didn't notice, honestly, because I think I don't have like a 1963 sensibility. Like I'm not watching black and white films as much. So I didn't notice that they're paler when it's cold, but I'm sure on a rewatch I could notice it. But that was cool. So the women cling to each other in terror. Mm-hmm. I also noticed that whenever the women are scared, there's close-up shots on their faces.
Yeah.
Like the movie is really interested in women's fear.
Yeah, definitely. Especially Nell's, I feel like.
Especially Nell's, yeah. So there's something is like sniffing and grunting outside the door and turns the knob. They hear a young girl's high-pitched laughter. The haunting subsides, and Luke and the doctor enter, and Dr. Markway says he feels like something is trying to keep them all separate.
Yeah. Because he was outside with the dog that they found or something.
Oh, yeah. What about the dog? What was with the dog? Do you remember?
Dr. Markway said that he heard something like sniffing outside of his door or running past his door. So him and Luke went outside to like follow it. I don't know if they actually saw the dog, but they just like heard dog noises. And there's also like the sniffing and grunting outside of Theo's door. But yeah, I was like, it made me think about hellhounds because I've been reading this book that has hellhounds in it, I think. And so I was just like curious as to like what exactly that dog entity was supposed to be.
Yeah, and what is a hellhound?
It's like basically like a demon entity that is sort of like a wolf dog that can be called by like spirits or people with supernatural like leanings.
Oh, yeah, kind of like a familiar.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because I was just talking about the movie Rebecca for this podcast with another guest, and there's a dog in that too. And yeah, we never learn like what exactly the sniffing and grunting is that happens, but that makes a lot of sense. It's a hellhound. So Eleanor expresses, the next day, Nell and Dr. Markway are alone, and Markway explains his past, and Eleanor expresses that she remembers being afraid last night, but not what it felt like. Yeah. And which I found interesting.
Me too.
And like the house, but also reminded me of birth, right? Like how if you give birth, you remember that it was painful, but you can't remember the pain because your body like wants you to give birth again. So yeah, so I mean, of course, obviously it's different for everybody, but a lot of people who have given birth have said that they remember that it was painful, but they can't remember what it felt like. Yeah. Right, because then you would never want to do it again if you remembered it. So that was interesting to me. And also like the house is making her forget her fear. Yeah. So the house like it's an antagonistic relationship because the house is scared. It wants to scare her, but also wants her to stay.
Yeah.
So
very interested in her staying.
Yes.
Which is evidenced by like later scenes when stuff happens with like the writing on the wall.
Right. Oh yeah, I think that happens now. I think so Dr. Markway says it's not a good thing that she says she's excited by the house. He says that's not a good thing. Which kind of made me feel like there's some subtext there of like him repressing her sexuality in some way.
Yeah.
And the Theo enters and she's like pissed off at Dr. Markway because she feels like he didn't explain how haunted the house is.
Yeah, definitely.
And she also says she's afraid of getting what she really wants.
Yeah, I noticed that. I wrote that down. Just because it's like such an odd phrase.
Yes.
Afraid of what I really want. And I was thinking about that in the context of her sexuality.
Yes.
Afraid of like confronting her desires for women. And I'm not sure if like in her life in whatever city she lives in, she's like openly out and like living in that way. But it felt like to me like a comment on her sexuality.
I agree. Yeah, there's a lot of hints at it.
Yeah.
And that's one of them. So in the hallway, Luke shows the group the strange writing in chalk that's appeared on the wall. And it says, "Help Eleanor come home." And you could read that so many ways. Like you could read it like, "Help Eleanor come home." You could also read it as, "Help Eleanor come home," like to the house. You don't know how to read it. And Nell is horrified and distraught. Nell accuses Theo of writing it because she didn't have breakfast with her. So she's already accusing Theo of like being gay. I feel like there's
definitely.
She's like, you wrote it because you're deranged and gay, and I wouldn't have breakfast with you. And Theo says maybe Nell wrote it because she wants attention.
Yeah.
After all, why did she change her hair?
That comment. Oh my goodness.
Right, which is so gaslighting too, because she told Nell to change her hair. and then Nell apologizes, which is very typical of somebody who's being gaslit. Like, oh, you're right. I'm sorry, I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Luke shows the group how each statue in this area of the house is a person who occupied Hill House. So even the companion who inherited the house has a statue. And they all think that the companion statue looks like Nell.
Yeah.
And Markway says she's a natural beauty.
Yeah.
And Nell is pleased.
Yeah. Theo is not pleased.
No.
Yeah.
This is when Nell starts to develop a crush on Dr. Markway.
Yeah.
Which he fucking feeds.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Like,
he loves it.
Yeah, he loves it. He's like, oh, natural beauty. Like,
yeah.
You know how she's gonna take that, dude. Luke sexually harasses Theo. Like, you remember he's like touching her and she's like, don't touch me.
Yeah, exactly.
There's an eerie kind of discord among the group. It's very much a dysfunctional family. Like,
definitely.
They all act, they're bound by trauma. Like, they are so scared of this house and they cling to each other because there's no one else there, but they're also they also have like such discord among them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
The immense library contains this ramshackle spiral staircase from which the previous owner hanged herself, and Nell is deeply disturbed by the library and can't even enter it.
Yeah, the smell like overcomes her.
Yeah,
and to remind her of the smell of her mother.
Yes.
When she is like sick and dying.
I was wondering if you had any ideas about why it would be the library. Like, what about the symbolism of books and libraries?
I don't know. I think probably there's this connection between like libraries being this place of like learning and knowledge, and this like vast amount of information that's in there. And then like Nell, who spent her entire adult life, you know, caring for her sick mother, never really got to explore anything, never got to go to school or do anything to expand or like expound her mind or anything like that. And so I think there's like a connection there of like her almost rejecting this place of knowledge because it's not something that was ever available to her and she never knew that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. And also that aspect, and also of knowledge being kept from women in general.
Yeah, true.
And you know, Theo has no problem entering because Theo feels that the world is open to Theo. Like, she doesn't have a problem moving into spaces and feeling like she has access, but Nell is really repressed. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, the camera moves in such a way where it seems like the spirit is entering her, because she's out on the balcony outside the library and she's musing on what it would be like to fall from this tower. Mm-hmm. So she's kind of suicidal.
Yeah.
And the spirit, it looks like his spirit's entering her and she almost falls like the wife did falling down the stairs.
Yeah.
And Dr. Markway catches her. And he insists on sending her home, but she refuses. And he thinks she might be hallucinating and compromising the experiment. Which I was like, you know what, dude? Fuck you. Like, you knew that this person was fragile. And also, isn't this what you wanted?
Yeah, it's exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking for evidence of the supernatural, and you have it now with these, like, two women telling you that there was like banging on the door, and then there's this like mysterious writing on the wall, and he's suddenly like, oh, it's a hallucination.
Right. Gaslighting. Yeah. He tells Theo to move in with Nell. And in the room that night, Theo gets Nell drunk and Nell paints her toes. This scene is really queer coded.
Mm.
Theo is like the kind of evil unmarried lesbian who's trying to loosen Nell up.
Yeah. Definitely.
And she also says, "You'll be a different person when I'm through with you."
Yeah.
Which I was like, okay, hot. This is supposed to be, there's just like a lot of subtext there.
Yeah.
Markway calls for the women because him and Luke have found this cold spot in the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes that this is the heart of Hill House.
Yeah, the nursery.
Right, the nursery. Which, again, womb imagery.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in the room, Theo says to Nell, "Why are you mad at me? I don't think you killed your mother."
Ooh, yeah.
Right, because Theo can, like, kind of read Nell's mind. And this is when we learn that Eleanor feels guilty because she feels like she killed her mother. So Eleanor is awakened by the sounds of a man speaking indistinctly and a woman laughing. So fear of sexuality, fear of adult sexuality.
Yeah.
Fearful, Eleanor asks Theo to hold her hand. And as soon as she feels this crushing grip.
Yeah.
And Eleanor hears the sound of a young girl crying, and she shouts at whoever is causing the child pain.
Mm-hmm.
Then Theo awakens with a start and turns on the light, and we see that Eleanor has moved from the bed to the couch suddenly, and she realizes that Theo was not the one holding her hand.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Yeah, that scene was very creepy.
Yeah, and
because there's like that death grip on her hand.
Right. And it just like the idea of hand holding and like toxic intimacy also, like someone crushing your hand even though you've asked for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Eleanor tells Dr. Markway she's afraid it's all in her mind. Of course she feels like that because everybody's telling her it's all in her mind.
She's telling her that all the time.
Yeah. She confesses to him that the night her mother died, that her mother knocked on the wall, but Nell didn't answer because she was asleep for once, and she feels intense guilt. And Dr. Markway says she's just human and was tired after caring for her mother for 11 years, as anybody would be. And Theo mocks Nell in front of Dr. Markway about her ambition for her own apartment.
Yeah, that was sad.
That was sad. She's like jealous because Nell has a crush on Dr. Markway.
Yeah.
Though she has this cycle where she abuses and then comforts Nell.
Exactly.
Which, and I just said this in my Rebecca episode too, like my PSA to queers, this is actual trauma bonding. Like trauma bonding is not like talking about your trauma. Trauma bonding is when somebody abuses you and then comforts you after they abuse you so that they become like the source of the pain and also of the comfort.
Definitely.
So everything is like tied up in that person. And yeah, there's a lot of like classic emotional abuse stuff in this movie, like gaslighting, trauma bonding, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Theo follows Eleanor, calling her a stupid fool for having a crush on Dr. Markway.
Yeah.
And Nell says the world is full of unnatural things. You, for instance.
Yeah.
So this is also queer coding. She knows that Theo is gay.
Yeah, for sure.
And Theo knows she knows. Like, she reacts to that very, like, okay, she knows who I am. What do you think about... I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, what do you think about the way Theo is coded?
I think there's, like, some interesting parallels between, like, queerness and the supernatural or like, unnatural things that happen in this. You know, like, everybody in the house supposedly has had these experiences with the supernatural, like things like that. But Theo's the only one that like has a power. You know, like she's a psychic. She can see things. She knows things. Nell's experience is just, you know, like the stone shower that happened at her house. yeah, she like it seems like everything is more open and um open and like available to Theo because of her her like supernatural power, which is connected to her queerness in some way. At least that's what I got from it.
Right.
Like the way that she moves around the house with ease, and she
Mm.
goes into the library despite there being this like intense suicide that took place there, and there's like some haunting elements in there too. Um, she just seems like it seems like the her being a lesbian or like a queer woman gives her a power that is like repulsive but also attractive in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it also puts her on the same level as the men,
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Like her and the men can access different parts of the house, whereas Nell and then later Grace
Yeah.
are obscured by the house. Like they get lost in the house. They can't
Mhm.
move freely through the house. Like
Yeah.
Theo's power masculinizes her, and it is both coded as evil and also as empowering,
Yeah, exactly.
which is interesting. Like there's it's like kind of the most non-judgmental predatory lesbian trope I've seen. It's like she's abusive, but then she's also like kind of a complicated person who also has a lot of power and can move with
Definitely.
ease through things. And she doesn't die at the
Yeah.
end, which is interesting, which is like most coded predatory lesbians in film die.
Hmm.
So she's not condemned in that way at the end of the film. Spoiler, it's been it's been out since 1963, so see it, please. It's a great movie. Uh, so Dr. Markway's wife, Grace, arrives at Hill House and warns her husband that a reporter has learned of his investigation. Um, Imagine anyone caring about that nowadays. So,
Yeah, right.
okay, some creep is investigating a house. Like, there's shows about it now. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
just so funny to me. Grace announces that she plans to join the group for the duration of the investigation. She demands a bed in the nursery,
Mhm.
despite her husband's warning that it is likely the center of the disturbances. Uh, Interesting, because she's the only married woman,
Yeah,
and she wants to be in the nursery.
yeah, definitely.
Grace seems like like half the cast is British, half the cast is American. Grace seems like this plucky American broad. Like she's like Dr. Markway is like more of a stuffy kind of British guy. I mean, I actually can't tell who's British and who's American, but I know from reading that
Yeah.
there some of the cast was American, some was British. Um yeah, and she just kind of seems like she kind of orders Dr. Markway around. She's
Definitely.
like, okay, anyway, I'm staying in this room. I'm not staying in a room with you.
Mhm.
Eleanor keeps looking at things and saying, my mother. Like everything is reminding her of her mother.
Yeah.
Theo leads her away gently. So again, like they were just abusing each other. Like they were
Yeah.
just having this horrible fight, and now she's gently leading her away. Nell's inner monologue tells us she's scared of losing her place in the house not now that Dr. Markway's wife is here.
Yeah.
Markway wants the women to spend the night in the parlor because their room isn't safe. That night, the group experiences loud banging and an unseen force attempting to force its way into the living room in which they're staying. The banging then proceeds and moves up to the nursery, where we can hear sounds of destruction. And Eleanor runs to the nursery, but Grace has disappeared, and no one knows where she is. They're not concerned enough with this.
Yeah, not at all. She really disappears, and they're sort of like, well, I guess we have to find her.
I know, she's straight up gone from the room. Like, I would be freaking out.
Yeah,
Dr. Markway is like, she's gone. Nell's grasp on sanity is very tenuous at this point.
definitely.
She says, I'm disappearing inch by inch into this house,
Yeah.
which is, it brings to mind this idea of the house like swallowing you, but it's also very sexual, like going inch by inch into something.
Yeah.
She wants to stay at Hill House, and she always, and she says, I will not be frightened or alone anymore. She enters the library and she climbs the dilapidated spiral staircase, and once she reaches the top, this is so funny, Grace appears unexpectedly at a trapdoor, looking like crazed and disheveled. And she startles Eleanor to her, like nearly falls to her death.
Yeah.
So she's like feral in the house.
Yeah.
It's so strange. Like she's
only a few minutes have passed since she's like gone missing, but she's already like dirty and disheveled.
Yes.
Like has this wild look in her eye, and it's like so weird.
It's so weird and creepy. And Markway rescues Eleanor, but just misses seeing Grace, who has disappeared. So she like opens this trapdoor and then like closes it. And Markway becomes alarmed at Eleanor's obsession with the house, and despite her pleas to stay, he insists that she leave at once and asks Luke to accompany her home. She says, it's the only time anything's ever happened to me. I'm the one it really wants. Can't you feel it? It's alive, watching, waiting. She's fully enmeshed with the house. I mean, her and this, her in this relationship, all of her relationships are abusive and toxic. Like her relationship with her mother, her relationship with Theo, and her relationship with this house. Like, it's both terrifying and she wants to stay there forever.
Yeah.
Before he can join her in the car, Luke, Eleanor drives off and speeds down the road towards the front gates, and she soon feels the steering wheel move by itself, and the car advances erratically. She struggles to regain control, but then surrenders. And suddenly Grace appears from behind a tree and steps in front of the car, and Eleanor crashes into the tree and is killed. The same tree that the first Mrs. Crane crashed into. So the house has claimed her.
Yeah.
So Eleanor dies. Not anybody else. And Grace explains that she got lost in the house. Yeah. And that she doesn't know how she got outside. What do you make of this?
It was strange for me. I feel like throughout the movie there was some like drawing of parallels between Eleanor and like the companion.
Mm-hmm.
She looks like her because of the statue, and then there's the fact that like both of them ignored knocks on the wall from like women they were taking care of, and those women died as a result. So I was thinking that like the house was like trying to claim Eleanor because it reminded her of the house was reminded of the companion.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to like absorb Eleanor because of that. But then there's this like ending scene where she dies, and there's a parallel made between her and like the first wife of the house. And also there's this like strange thing about like wives and how they are treated in the film. Like Grace basically goes crazy and like is running feral in the woods. And then both of what's his name, Hugh's wives die
right
early on, and there's just like something about like the power and independence that these women have that like the house wants to claim in some way.
Yeah, or like the house wants to make them like its wives or something. And also there's like some doppelganger thing going on. Like Theo is the only brunette, maybe. Yeah. Am I wrong? Like I feel like all of the wives and also the companion and Grace are all blonde.
Yeah, I think so.
And Theo, her hair like, distinguishes her. And yeah, like there's kind of a fluid relationship between all of those women. Like they all become each other.
Yeah, definitely.
Like Grace becomes Eleanor, like she becomes this crazed woman, like running feral through the house. So she becomes Eleanor, but she also becomes the companion, and Eleanor becomes the companion and also the wives, and also Dr. Markway's wife when she's having like a love thing with him. So they women like all are enmeshed and become each other except Theo.
Yeah.
Which again sets her apart. And Luke observes that it seemed that Eleanor deliberately aimed the car at the tree, but Markway asserts that something else was in the car with her, and he notes that, right, he is the one who says, oh, okay, this is the tree that killed the first Mrs. Crane. And Theo remarks that Eleanor got what she wanted, to remain with the house.
Yeah, Theo.
Yeah. So she's like she's the one of the last words of the movie.
Yeah.
And that is The Haunting.
Yeah. Theo seemed like remarkably unaffected by.
I know. Yeah, she was like, yeah, well, now she's with the house. It's like, okay. They're all like not sad enough about it. It's like when Grace goes missing, they're not concerned enough. It's they're not an emotional bunch, and yet they are. It's strange. So, anything else that you wanted to say about this film?
I don't think so. I think what really still sticks with me throughout, like I watched it a couple times, but just like thinking about Theodora and like her power, and how that gives her this like freedom to live, but also, I think at one point even Nell calls her repulsive, like that, and there's just like very weird balance that gets struck between like powerful but also disgusting because of her queerness, that I haven't really seen a lot in movies where there's queer coding, and like that predatory lesbian vibe that happens in these movies. It's usually like the queer coding makes the character disgusting, and they die at the end or somewhere in the movie.
Yeah. The lesbians usually die.
Yeah. But Theo is awarded this like sort of untouchability because of who she is and the power that she has, that I found very striking.
Yes. Yeah. Theo's the most, well, her and Eleanor are their relationship is the most interesting aspect of the movie to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Their like weird codependent abusive relationship.
Yeah.
So thank you for talking about The Haunting with me.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Where can people find you on social media if you want them to?
You can find me on Instagram at BelleBivDeHo.
Amazing.
And my Twitter is at FigWidow.
And do you have any projects or writings you want to promote?
Well, you can check out my writing on Autostraddle. Just go to Autostraddle.com and search Dani Janae, and you can find everything that I've written for them. I have a few projects coming out that I'm very excited for, so look out for those. And my website, where all of my poetry and stuff is at, is figwidow.com, so you can check that out too.
Awesome. And you know where to find me as always. Twitter and Instagram, Girls Guts Giallo, patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And I will see you next week, next Friday.